Vitamins for your head. That was sort of an ad that ran in Denmark some years back. I'm not even sure I can recall the company, but it was a publishing company, a book company, something along those lines. And I think they were debating, or they were trying to push the agenda that the book is not dead. I think it was some years back when there was a lot of debate whether the book would die as a medium that we will all be reading on our iPhones and iPads and all that. And then they launched this campaign saying vitamins for your head. And I actually thought that was a good way of starting this, because what I'm about to show you here is actually vitamins for your head, your photography head. And I start out with this book here by Joel Sartore. I hope I'm saying his name right. He is a very experienced photographer. And as you can see, if I do, I've been practicing this, but you can see I'm not doing so terribly well. But you can see he is a National Geographic's shooter. And I think it's on their publishing company this book is made. He is really a great photographer, and I enjoy especially his color and his use of color, I would say. Maybe you can sense that if I show you the front page. Again here, you can see there's lots of colors, and also inside there's lots of illustrations, also very colorful, very typical, I would say, for Joel. And I follow him on Instagram, and he to me he seems very approachable. I mean, I'm Mr. Nobody in photography, and yet every time I've written a comment to his picture, he's kindly replied. So he seems very approachable. And for colors, I would say this is, photo basics. I would take this if I was brand new to photography, and you ask me one book to that famous Lonely Island, this would be the one, because he covers a lot of ground, not in very much depth, but he covers a lot of ground. And as such, it is a really, really good book. It's an easy read, and that may fool you a little bit, because he writes in a way where it seems very, how should I say it? I wouldn't say easy, but it comes very naturally, and it seems so natural when you read it, and of course it's like that. But actually, when you try to do it in real life, of course, it gets much more complicated. And also, when you have a little bit more experience and you come back to this book, you will find he did actually cover some pretty advanced topics, but it's sort of baked into the easy way it's presented, if that makes sense. So this is a book you can come back to several times as you grow in your experience, and that's why I recommend this book strongly. And follow him on Instagram if you want to learn more about colors and how to use colors. He is my color master. I've written that to him several times on Instagram, and I really mean that. He knows a thing or two about colors. A little funny side story is, because I follow him on Instagram, his mother is 104 years old, I believe, if my memory serves me right. And she works every day. She still goes down to her shop and opens it up and, runs a shop. 104 years old. Yeah, pretty impressive if you ask me. The next book is also by a guy I follow on Instagram. It's, let me see if I can hold that so the light doesn't reflect. It's Bryan F. Peterson. I think it's Bryan F. Peterson. Here he's only calling himself, as you can see here, Bryan Peterson. But I believe it's the same guy as Bryan F. Peterson on Instagram. And you can see here the purple color in the sky there. If I just open up and take the first image here. I think that's how he made a name originally when he was a young photographer. Or younger. I don't know exactly how old he is, but I don't want to offend anyone here. But you can see here he knows a thing or two about white balance. And he also knows a thing about exposure. So this one goes into more depth. Let's see if I can just, so you can see what it contains. You can see there's lots of examples, this one as well. And he goes into a lot of depth when it comes to exposure, obviously. And because he has a more narrow focus, it's also more specialized focus. So this could be a good book number 2, if you ask me, and you want to learn more about exposure. Bryan strikes me also as a very approachable guy. I follow him on Instagram. He also always replies, just like Joel. I've never tried to write him and he didn't reply. And he has a little brilliant thing that I strongly recommend you to follow him for that reason. He often, I was about to say almost daily, but at least a couple of times a week, he shows an image and then he tells you the story around that image. He takes you behind the scenes. So you get the finalized result. And then he says, okay, so this was how I did the image, and these were my camera settings, and la-di-da-di-da. And he then also sometimes follows that, the finished image with some supporting image where he shows you maybe some of the tools he has used to make the image, and take you a little bit behind the scenes, basically. And that is just so useful. Because I sit there every time I say, how did he do that? How did he make this image? And boom, I get the answer right there. And that's my experience from learning is if there's a very short distance between that you sort of recognize, I need to learn how to do this, and then you get the answer to how to do that. When those two are very close to each other, then you have a chance to learn something really fast. And that's what he does. And I think it's brilliant. And I can only recommend you follow him on Instagram, provided that, of course, you don't want to buy his book, which I think is pretty good. Another little thing, I'm not in the publishing business, but this is the 4th edition. And to me, that tells me that this book has been well received by the audience, and he has sold a lot of copies. And I think that is very well deserved. I forgot to say Bryan's motto is "You keep shooting," and he pushes that motto very, very much. Joel, on the other hand, he has another motto. He says, if there's something in your frame that is not working for you, it's actually working against you. In other words, there cannot be neutral things in your frame, so you need to figure out, is it working for you or against you? That's food for thought, and I would say there are several things in his book that are actually food for thought. Still staying with the basics of photography, I would say this one here by Michael Freeman. I have no relation to Michael. I don't follow him on Instagram, but this is a very good book. He doesn't exactly put a dim on his shine, you can say. He says over 4 million sales worldwide. And also he calls it the photography Bible. So there you have it. I mean, I would expect the Bible to be somewhat bigger. That was my first reaction when I got the book. But it's actually quite comprehensive. Let me see if I can show you the content here as I speak. If I'm allowed to, yeah. You can see I use this book as a dictionary. So every time there is a concept I can't recall or something I can't remember or whatever the situation is, I use this book. And as such, it's super useful. When I just got it, I read it front to back. It's not as easy a read as the other two I showed you, for the simple reason that it's very, should I say, compartmentalized, so that each subject is treated, not as fluently as the other two books. But I think it's a very good book, and it is pretty complete, I would say. So I use this as a reference, perhaps more than I use it as, a book, a consult, going back to study certain sections. I use it as a dictionary, to be quite honest. I didn't enjoy the last part. He talks about post-processing. I don't know why. I didn't like that part. But the first 3/4 is actually really, really good, if you ask me. Then if we move a little bit more into the advanced stuff, and now we're moving away from the basics and into perhaps more being a photographer, not, what aperture should you use and what is depth of field and all of these things, but more talking about photography and the art of seeing. It's Freeman Patterson. I think this is a series of books. I only have this one, unfortunately, so I can only tell you about this one. But this one is really, really good in terms of talking about how you start to see. And then you may think, how you start to see, man. I see every day. What are you talking about? But actually seeing as a photographer, so you start to see before you shoot, if that makes sense. So that There is a step before you actually hit the shutter, and that is very much what he's talking about. And he has a lot of exercises where he calls it, what does he call it? I just wrote it down here. Thinking sideways. I would call it thinking out of the box. But he basically challenges you to do some exercises where either via limitations or via breaking limitations, you take yourself and your photography to a new place. One of the exercises is write down some of the rules you follow as a photographer, whatever they are. And then deliberately go and make images where you break those rules and see what happens. And as he says, don't expect masterpieces, but expect a struggle. And I think that is beautifully said. And this will bring, I think, your photography to a new level if you follow some of the exercises in this book. It comes super highly recommended, and there's lots of examples and illustrations and so on. So I can recommend this book. And he talks very much about the expression you want and the effect your images you want them to have. And I can say the reason why maybe I enjoy this book extra much these days is that I'm in a bit of a crisis, to be quite honest, because my sweet wife, she said to me, we were rearranging the room, and then she said to me, now we have this wall over here. There was, we moved stuff around, and then there was a wall where there was nothing. So we had a chance to put something new on the wall. And she said to me, why don't we take some of your work, Frederick, and put that on the wall? And sweet wife, I mean, some of my work, yeah, of course, let's go and do that. Very kind suggestion from her, of course. And I thought nothing of it and said, yes, let's do that. And then we put some of my pictures on the wall. And I must say, that was perhaps the biggest Eureka moment I've ever experienced as a photographer. Man, was I bored. They were very nice images, good composition, if I should review my own work, but man, it was boring. I mean, so boring, and especially when you then put many of them next to each other, it's like, hasn't this, I mean, yeah, I won't go into detail. I would just say that's why I'm in a very big crisis, and I think some of the exercises that he's recommended will help me move on. And those of you who follow me on Instagram will see that all of a sudden my images have gone very, very colorful in a very short while. The reason is simply that I'm in this crisis initiated by my wife, who in the best of intentions suggested that we put some of my work on one of our walls. I think it's Mike Brown. I will post a link to him, but I think it's Mike Brown who says, before you hit the shutter, consider if you would actually take the picture you're about to take and put it on your own wall. And I think that is a brutal question, if you ask me. The last book, I have one more. That's a little cliffhanger, so don't drop out yet if unless you're super bored, of course. But I will mention this book, this little paperback, 320 pages. And it's written by Sean Tucker, as you can see. Some of you may know him as a videographer. Some of you may know him as a photographer. And he does both portrait and street photography. And he's also been a musician. And it's quite an interesting book just to get to know him. He talks about many things. It's a very broad scope. He talks about strategy, psychology, motivation, religion. He was actually a priest once, believe it or not, also a musician. So he's really covering a lot of ground. But what I think works, or what I found really interesting in this book, was the way he uses feedback. I don't know how you feel about feedback and criticism, and I know amongst photographers we say we grow as we get feedback. That's not my stronghold. This guy has taken a very, very early in his life, I must say, taken a very deliberate decision to use feedback very, very systematically. And he tells his story where it's very clear to me how hard some of the feedback he has gotten has been to process, to take in and act upon. But his reflections are super interesting. And it comes down to, being creative, what motivates you, those types of subjects or questions. And I can only recommend this book. If you live in the UK, it's January 2023. He's touring with the book, I believe. I mean, no, he's not flashing the book. I would assume he would show some slides with some of the content from the book and talk about that, and then you can interact with him after the talk. That would be my expectation. I haven't seen it, so I don't know. I don't live in the UK, but maybe if you live in the UK, there's a chance to look him up. I can only imagine that would be super interesting to see what he has to say. Can you see what you have to say? I'm not sure. The cliffhanger. Vermeer. Do you know the guy? Painter. You can see here, this is a very famous picture. It's called The Girl with the Pearl Earrings, I think. And there's a lot of speculation around how this image came about and whether this girl ever existed, and so on and so forth. So here you can see one of his images where the light comes in from the left and how he uses the light to create the scene. And it's very, very often in his images, the lights come in from the left. And I really like his work. I think many do. And one of the things that struck me, and you can check this, you can look up his images if you want to yourself. One of the things that struck me was that when you look, not at his landscapes, because they're tack sharp, but if you look at his portraits, all of his images, when you're going very, very close to the portrait, they're soft. So there's something for us gearheads that sit and wonder which lens is the sharpest and so on and so forth. Vermeer, he actually painted, as far as I can tell, I'm happy to be challenged here, but as far as I can tell, when you really have these images where you're close to the subject, they fill the frame, then they're soft. And I found that really interesting. It works really well when you see it from a distance, and I can talk long about viewing distance, as you know, those of you who have followed this channel. But there is something to be learned from these old masters, and sharpness is certainly not a prerequisite for a good picture. Next time I'll be talking about what it means to be in the zone, according to yours truly, in the zone of where you make some good images or take some good pictures. A little bit of psychology from an amateur. So I hope you will look forward to that. As always, happy shooting. Take care. Bye-bye.